Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of our 7investing podcast. I'm 7investing founder and CEO Simon Erickson, joined by my team of 7investing lead advisors, Dan Klein, Max Chatsko, Dana Abramovitz, Steve Symington, Matt Cochran, and Anirban Mahanti. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good evening, depending on what part of the world you are. Are you ready for our team podcast for April?
Ready as we're going to be.
Yeah.
Let's go. Let's do it.
Fantastic. Well, it's so fitting that we're calling from all parts of the world because our topic this month was international investing. And the perspective question that I asked the team was what region of the world are you particularly interested in right now? And maybe even what's one company that's also catching your eye as well. And so we all chimed in on that with our perspective articles. We're going to discuss that same topic on our podcast here tonight. Max Chatsko, I will start with you because you talked about Argentina as the country that was on your radar. You said that it has some gifts of energy, lithium, and agriculture. What is it about Argentina that you like so much?
Yeah, so to start off, Argentina is not in a very good place right now. It's in a pretty big recession. It doesn't have the best management and government and structure there. It's been mirrored in recessions, and it's had stagflation for several decades. So that's inflation and stagnation, meaning no growth. It's the worst economic combination you can have. But this is a great example of buy low and sell high, Simon. So, Argentina has a lot of things cooking for it, especially as, some of these geopolitical concerns start to ramp up in other parts of the world. You can make a strong case that the United States is going to start thinking about its spheres of influence more methodically. So it makes a lot of sense to pull South America back into the American sphere of influence and away from China. It also makes sense because it's, South America is very rich with mineral resources, lots of energy resources. Over half of the world's lithium production currently comes from 3 South American companies. Argentina would be one of them. It currently is a little bit behind in some of its peers, but so Argentina has a lot to offer. And like I said in my article, it's got these 3 pillars that could really help it to recover pretty quickly and launch back onto the international stage. So it has energy resources. That includes an oil formation that's the largest shale oil formation outside of the United States. So it could export a lot of energy. It could also export it regionally, not just globally off of the continent, but also to help bolster some of its own domestic manufacturing. A lot of natural gas can power a lot of domestic manufacturing. That could even help some American companies offshore, away from Asian markets and closer to home in Argentina. It's a much closer shipping route as well, I might point out. So it has energy going for it. It also has a lot of lithium, as I said. So Argentina is it's the A in the ABCs of the lithium triangle, which is where most of the world's lithium currently comes from. So that'd be Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile. It's currently a little bit behind, again, because of the economy. It's kind of scared away a lot of foreign investment, but we're starting to see some of that ramp up. And in fact, there's going to be a 4 to 5x increase in lithium output in Argentina from now to 2022. So very quickly, a lot of projects are going to start ramping up. We also have the bioeconomy, which is what I teased in the title of my article. And, what the Midwest is to the United States in terms of the agricultural powerhouse, the Pampas region is to Argentina. And it has an advantage over its northern neighbor, which is Brazil. A lot of people talk about Brazil as being, it's one of the BRIC nations. It's one of these emerging economies everyone talks about. But Argentina actually has some, a little bit better advantages in terms of geography. And also being further south, it actually has winter. So that might seem like a terrible thing, right? We have a lot of people on our team that live in Texas and Florida, and you guys can barely handle, 50-degree weather at times.
It's true, Max. That's true.
But in agriculture, having winter, experiencing all 4 seasons is actually a really good thing. When you have deep freezes, it freezes the pests. So it really helps to limit pests, and you can use less chemicals. You have higher yields from time to time. So that is a fantastic advantage. So those combinations, energy, lithium, and also agriculture really help to lift it, as well as some of the geopolitical things going on. So Argentina, I think, is poised to, reemerge as a regional superpower. It's really in the dumps right now in terms of like its ranking in the international order. But because of its geopolitical and geographic strengths, 100 years ago, it was actually the 7th richest nation in the world. And it was always in the top 10. And it was only until, the Americans industrialized after the Industrial Revolution. We reemerged from World War II very strong. And, geopolitical matters haven't really mattered since Bretton Woods in the post-war order. So as those things start to kind of fall away, Argentina is looking like it is really poised to reemerge here.
Well, definitely a lot to offer there, Max. Like you said, energy is one, the bioeconomy is one, lithium, pretty interesting. But I've got to ask some follow-up questions for each one of these. My one for you is, you mentioned also in your report that Argentina has defaulted internationally 9 times. It also has kind of a bad history of hyperinflation. So how do you think about these risks? Do you want to invest directly in the region, or maybe you kind of get away from some of those risks by investing in American companies that have ties to the area?
Yeah, so that's a good way to manage it, I would think. Invest in some international companies that aren't using the Argentina currency. So you want things that are based in U.S. dollars. And it's important to point out too, there's a couple things that mean that might not be as big of a risk going forward. A, the recovery can probably be pretty swift. B, the country was actually kind of reemerging before the coronavirus pandemic. So the timing here in the last year was just awful, and it kind of knocked it back a few years once again. But also we have the debt to the international community. I mean, we've seen like the International Monetary Fund's actually been a lot less restrictive on austerity measures it's placed on some of its members and countries that take loans. So it's kind of allowed some more breathing room. So it frees up more capital to invest domestically in programs. So hopefully some of those loans are coming up again, and the terms can be renegotiated here. That's actually going on right now with Argentina. So if they can renegotiate more favorable terms, free up more capital, invest in some more domestic programs, then hopefully that can ease some of those economic concerns and allow foreign investment to come back into the country. But yes, for the most part, definitely invest in foreign companies that are interested there.
Well, very true, Max. One last question for you before we move on here. Something else that Argentina is a very, very great producer of is wine. It is the largest producer of wine in South America, also the 5th largest in the world. My final question for you is over or under. Argentina is not that large of a country, but does it have more or less than 1,000 officially recognized wineries in the country?
I want to say over.
It is. The correct answer is officially about 2,000 officially recognized in Argentina. I think that's pretty impressive.
I actually, my favorite wine is something called Pinotage. It's actually from South Africa, but Argentina is the same latitude. So they actually have some Pinotage that gets grown there. So when I can't find the South African section in the winery store, I go to Argentina. Sometimes they can bail me out.
Perfect. Duly noted on that one. Thanks very much, Max, for the recap on Argentina. Let's shift to another country in South America. Steve Symington, you were talking about a fintech company that's in Brazil. What's this country, or what's this company, and why is this region of interest to you?
Right. So, you asked this question, kind of what regions are we interested in? And I struggled a little bit because I find myself kind of less compelled of late by region specific companies. I prefer more to look at businesses whose products translate well on a global scale anyway, regardless of where they're based. But Brazil has been interesting. And there's a stock that kind of entered my radar over the last several months or so. That's actually a Berkshire Hathaway holding, which was really interesting, called StoneCo, and a Brazil-based fintech company. I think Berkshire bought 14 million shares. It was like an 8% stake in the company around the time of its IPO. But it's really interesting because it offers a wide array of products that are catered to small and medium-sized businesses in Brazil. And we're talking about banking products to payment processing and e-commerce solutions and point of sale hardware even. So not just digital stuff. And part of that is because Brazil's kind of going through this pivot where it's retailers and small businesses want omnichannel solutions, right? So a lot of their business is still kind of done in person and in cash. I think 85% of transactions in the country are still cash. And we're talking 213 million people in Brazil. And, only 8% of sales there came from e-commerce platforms last year, even during the pandemic. So really kind of interesting opportunity for a fintech company that offers a decent array of products to kind of shine on the process. So it's pulled back pretty hard in recent months, I think 30% down from its highs. So popped onto my radar and really interesting. StoneCo, ticker is STNE.
Yeah. Great one, Steve. And so back to that point you made about 85% of transactions still happening in cash, but it seems like there's some transitions underway in Brazil. How does consumer finance look in the country? Are we going to kind of credit cards like the Visa and MasterCards we've gotten used to, or is it going straight to digital and leapfrogging a lot of
Right. It's a strange combination of the two. So I think I read that like 59% of transactions, of e-commerce transactions, the relatively small portion that there are in the country, happen with credit cards. And I think around 70% of the population has a card of some kind. But at the same time, like a quarter of households in Brazil are still unbanked versus I think 5.4% or so in the United States. So it's really interesting to see kind of how they've shifted, and actually the share of credit card purchases for e-commerce transactions in Brazil is actually expected to decline as people kind of skip over cards altogether. And so yeah, it's a strange kind of process relative to what we're used to here in the United States.
Great. Okay. And one more for you, Steve. In the early 1990s, there was an excellent video arcade game called Street Fighter that came out. What was the name of the Brazilian character in Street Fighter?
Isn't that Blanca?
Yep, you got it.
Yeah,
I was wondering if you would remember it, Steve. Very impressive. I'm very impressed. Nothing to do with financial consumer cards, but I had to ask because we were talking about Brazil.
Yeah. Old school video game nerd. Street Fighter was my first game on the Super Nintendo, I think. Yeah.
I knew you'd love it, Steve. Let's shift to Dana Abramovitz. Now, Dana, you just recently joined the 7 Investing Lead Advisor team, so we didn't put you on the spot immediately for this perspectives topic, but I know that you follow a lot of healthcare companies. And since we're kind of talking about international investing and a bunch of different countries around the world, we've talked a lot about kind of health security, and we've talked a lot about COVID and the pandemic. And I guess how would you say that this pandemic has influenced kind of the rest of the world's thoughts on security or even healthcare as a whole?
It's really interesting. Epidemics have happened in different places, right? So a lot of times we've thought about, like, oh, there's this Ebola outbreak in Africa, there's, malaria in different places, and we never think of anything happening close to home. And then, here it is, right? And just how interesting, like as everybody was talking, thinking about that global perspective and just how easy it is for viruses, for disease to spread internationally, just because we're all so connected as a global population. So I think it's great. I mean, obviously the pandemic has not been great, but it's good for us and for people to think about other populations, and realizing that it can happen here as well. And how do we be more prepared? And so that global health security component, I think that we're going to see a lot more organizations that are doing work in this area, at least being more recognized than they were previously.
Yeah, and information sharing too, Dana. Have we come a long way in terms of countries or organizations sharing information? I know that sequencing was a really big deal for COVID. Are we starting to see more of that internationally as well?
So certainly, all the different pockets of countries that are developing vaccines, sharing information, we have to learn together. In order to solve the problem, because it's not, it's not just an a particular country's problem. It's this global problem that we've identified. And, I know that, there are places, countries around the world that are really struggling right now. India being one, we were chatting about them earlier. And just, delivering resources to them. They've helped us out previously. How do we, help out other countries that are, struggling now that we have some more things under control?
Perfect. Yeah, thanks very much, Dana. We're really excited to be working with you on the team. Really looking forward to your healthcare coverage and also seeing your very first 7 Investing recommendation, which will come out on Saturday, May the 1st. Let's shift gears here. Matt Cochran, let's come to you next. Your international region that you were looking at was the growing middle class of India. Tell me a little bit about this.
Yeah, absolutely. India is a country I want to say I watch closely. It has a population of 1.3 billion people, making it the second most populous country in the world. And, it's on track to pass China sometime soon in the next decade to be the most populous country. Its economy is the fifth largest in the world by GDP. It's almost $3 trillion. But even more important than its size, it's its economic upward trajectory, and the rise of its growing middle class. So case in point, from 2014 to 2018, India was the world's fastest growing economy. PricewaterhouseCoopers in 2016 predicted that the median salary for Indian workers would quadruple by 2030. Now look, and right now India is taking it on the chin with COVID. They are definitely going through a crisis there. The economy experienced a sharp contraction this past year because of COVID, but I expect that to be temporary. And one company I really like in India is HDFC Bank, and it's a position I've discussed before. So another company I'd like to discuss is Fairfax India Holdings, and it's an investment holding company that invests in public and private Indian securities. Its most significant investment by far, by dollar amount and percentage, is its 54% stake in the Bangalore International Airport. Bangalore is the third largest city in India, with its metropolitan area's population of more than 11 million people. And before the pandemic struck, this was a thriving and very profitable airport with a lot of plans to expand and develop unused land surrounding the airport. So right now, its annualized passenger traffic before the pandemic was about 34 million. And they're already constructing a second runway and terminal, which will increase capacity to 50 million. And that should be completed within the next year. And they already have plans in place after that to keep expanding the capacity until they reach until they can handle 90 million passengers by 2038. So this is a growing city, and with a growing population in India, I just like the idea of owning a very important piece of infrastructure. It's almost like owning O'Hare Airport in the US. And despite passenger traffic falling last year by 60%, revenue dropped 58% in the airport. Progress was still made on these expansion plans. Meanwhile, the international airport also found $10 million in annual savings due to efficiency measures. Now, this isn't the only holding in Fairfax India, even though it is the largest. They also own several financials and consumer good companies and logistics companies in India. And they're actually owned, their parent company is Fairfax Financial Holdings. And one of the bad things about the company is that they have to pay investment fees and performance fees to Fairfax Financial, which is a Canadian holding company. But I like the idea of owning a holding company with several key pieces of physical and financial infrastructure in India.
Great points, Matt. The rising wages, the growing middle class, definitely having an impact on the travel industry. I like the ideas there. Back in 2016, India basically banned its high denomination cash currencies. This was meant to fight corruption in the area, but what impact do you think that has on the digital payments industry or the banking industry within the country?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a coincidence that digital payments kind of exploded right after they did this. So just for a little background, in 2015 or 16, they banned the 50 and or 500 and 1,000 rupee notes. And now they later did issue new notes, on a limited basis for the 500 and 2,000 rupee banknotes. But immediately after they banned them, the number of debit cards and credit cards, but especially debit cards in the country exploded. In fact, at the time, even wrote a few pieces about how Visa and MasterCard could really benefit from it, but they never really did, because digital payments kind of just using mobile payments technology just kind of leapfrogged credit card, the card payments technology. And one of the main beneficiaries of that was Paytm. Right now, WhatsApp just got approved to move money and to be used as a digital wallet in India. So I think Facebook is actually another play you could do. But digital payments, I think they doubled in the 2 years following that.
Yeah, I love it, Matt. I always love hearing your coverage of digital payments, especially in international countries. Like India. My last question for you, Matt. You mentioned about airports and tourism through India.
Right.
It just so happens that the Taj Mahal is a very frequented site internationally. It was completed in 1653 as a tomb for the Shahs of the time. In today's figures, Matt, what was the cost of the Taj Mahal's construction?
In today's figures, $1 billion.
That is correct, actually. That is very impressive. You nailed it,
Never
Matt. It was
doubted.
about $956 million US dollars in today's currency, an estimated 32 million rupees at the time. Matt, I cannot believe you actually got that. I thought you were going to be off by an order of magnitude.
That was a softball. Come on.
Matt Cochran, follow him for the digital payments industry and random questions about international tourist sites. And Nirban, let's bring you into the discussion here. We were talking about India just a moment ago. You mentioned in your Perspectives article this month a little bit about e-commerce in India. What's on your radar internationally right now?
Yeah, so one of the things I was trying to say in my article is emerging economies tend to be a very interesting area to play, largely for all the reasons that Matt talked about and Steve talked about, right? Rising, actually even Max, Steve, and Matt, all three talked about. So rising economies, growing middle class, lots of optionality and so on. The question in my mind was, being the sort of the non-US investor here, is if you think about how people invest, people always invest via their local market, right? And one way to think about the returns of the local market is just look at a broad market index, right? And the returns for the Indian market has not been great. The return for the Brazilian market has not been great. The return for the Russian market has not been great. And so the broad market indices have actually delivered very poor returns. In fact, over the last 10 years, the best place to be invested was the NASDAQ 100, followed by probably like the S&P 500. Right. So one of the things I was trying to say is that if you are an investor outside the US and actually maybe Canada, you should really think about how global markets work. And the global markets, 55% of the equities are actually listed in the US, NYSE, and NASDAQ. If you do not invest there, you're basically missing out on what I call you're basically, it's like trying to fish for the tuna in a local pond. You're not going to get the tuna in the local pond. So that's the problem. You don't want, you want to know where the fish are. That's number one. Number two is that most of these companies that are listed are actually overseas companies, like StoneCo, for example, which I personally own, and I like that company. Which Steve brought up. Well, where is it listed? It's actually listed in the United States. So the best companies tend to actually be listed overseas. There's always exceptions to a rule. And even if they have a primary listing in a local market, they would have an ADR, which is an American Depository Receipt. So that was the other one point I was trying to make in terms of how to play the market, is that you can't really play using broad market indices because the likelihood of returns being good seems low to me. At least that's my view. So then the other thing, actually, one of the problems of going last is everything has been said. So I'm just repeating myself.
Including the price of the Taj Mahal.
The price of the Taj Mahal too. It was just actually, I would not have been able to answer that. So I'll own up to that. The other thing is that Steve was making this point, I think, that you want to find businesses that have a global exposure, right? So use today's example. So Apple reported 67% of Apple's revenue is actually international. So you want to find, because most consumer discretionary plays would have international components, right? So if you want to, for example, play e-commerce, well, you just think about the Indian e-commerce scenario. The largest player, the biggest player there is Amazon, right? Followed by Flipkart, which was local until it is no longer local, right? Now it's owned by Walmart. And then there are a bunch of other players. I think Reliance Industries is getting big into it with GeoMart. So that could be something, but you could actually play Reliance if you wanted to, which is basically a conglomerate, right? You could buy that by an ADR, for example, right? I think they have an ADR. So I think about those things, and I try to think about, if you think about streaming, for example, as an example, streaming again is huge. What is huge in India is, basically Hot Plus, which is effectively owned by Disney. used to be owned by Fox, but now it's owned by Disney. So they're the biggest streaming platform in India, right? And then I think it's second place might be something like Amazon, and then maybe Netflix, right? So that was the other point I was trying to make. So broadly, you can, I think, tap into the global trends. Most of global trends play. There might be exceptions to rules, like things like certain technologies leapfrog, like payments, right? And that's because of just differences in infrastructure, right? Because you don't have everybody with, everybody doesn't have a credit card, but everybody has a phone. So therefore, you can actually go to a wallet technology by skipping the credit card technology. And I would say that if Paytm, for example, was to list, I'd be very interested to see what that does. But maybe it's going to list in NASDAQ. That's the thing, right? So I think that's, keep an eye out for these classic plays. And another, I think this has already been made, is watch what Berkshire Hathaway is doing in the payment space. So very interesting. So what Berkshire Hathaway already has a stake in Paytm, just like they have a stake in StoneCo. So now you could play Berkshire Hathaway, but you'd get a bunch of industrial companies along with all those other things that you're getting. So, that was the point I was trying to make.
Sure. Yeah. Great points in here, Bon. A lot of those are listed, like you said, on American exchanges, or at least the ADRs are available for American investors. A lot to process there. A lot of countries. We mentioned South America. We mentioned India. I know in your report, you were also talking about a Russian company, a Russian e-commerce company. What role do you think, do you worry about corruption in emerging economies? Is that a risk for you? Or do you kind of relay that for a little bit when you're investing in companies that also have other prominent investors, like you mentioned Berkshire Hathaway on board?
I do worry about corruption. So I've once owned shares in a company called Luke and Coffee. Those people who have owned it before would know what happened with that. So reporting standards can be lax. There are issues with how things have been audited and things like that. So I do worry about that. And so one way to get around that is just to look at the team. To the founders, for example, have a lot of skin in the game. That doesn't necessarily say that the bad things are not going to happen, but at least, they're going to go down with the ship with you. If they own 50% of the company, they're going to lose a lot more than you owning 0.00001% of that company. So that's one of the things I look for, is who's invested. And then, the other people who are invested, say Berkshire Hathaway is invested or somebody else is invested, then, you get a little bit more. Or Prem Watsa, which is, I think, Fairfax Financials, which is what Matt Cochrane was talking about. So, those people have huge advantages in terms of just being able to access people and just do the due diligence that we might not be able to do. So I do worry about corruption. Then there are other issues in just how the market operates, right? So the reason I picked Ozon as an example is the Russian e-commerce market is very interesting. Russia is a big country, 100 million plus population, and the e-commerce market is highly fragmented, right? And they have high distrust for Western companies. So it's a perfect opportunity for taking platform ideas that exist and just basically duplicate it for that language, for that demographic, for that culture, make it culture specific. And you could actually win big there. It seems like Ozon is doing really well. So it's a company on my watch list. I haven't finished my due diligence, but I think it's growing really quickly. It's got a great, interesting market setup. There are other issues that I might be worried about in terms of, for example, if it gets into the bad books of the government, what might happen, for example, right? There's another, we know that such things can also happen. So those are sort of issues to think about. So maybe position size it accordingly.
Great points in here, Bon. Now, speaking of winning big, there are currently a total of 1,932 internationally recognized chess grandmasters in the world. This is recognized by the International Chess Federation. What percentage of those 1,932 have claimed Russia, the Soviet Union, or one of the Commonwealth of Independent States as their home country?
Oh, I don't know the answer. I'll take a wild guess here. I'd say probably around 20%. Russians are very smart.
You guys are amazing at this. I would have thought it was much higher. The actual answer is 22%. I think this shows how smart our 7investing team. Another just right of the horseshoe ringer right there. Amazing.
I just guessed it. So it was just good luck. Let's put it on that.
Fantastic. 429 of the 1,932 claimed Russia, Soviet Union, or one of the Commonwealth of Independent States. Very good at winning big at chess as well. Thanks very much, Anirban. Great points about everything that you said there. Let's bring it home here, Dan Klein. You know, I did hear Disney streaming in India, and Anirban just talked about that. You wanted to talk about the retail landscape in China, though.
Yeah. So whenever we do these perspectives, I often feel like I'm being a contrarian because I don't really invest in foreign companies. If I can't put my hands on something, I'm really not all that interested in it. Now, I've picked one company that's a foreign company technically, but most of its business is in the US. But I have a lot of exposure in China because I am a Starbucks shareholder. I am a Disney shareholder. And I think when you look at the market for American companies, China has been really tricky to crack. Disney Plus is not available in China. And if it ever were to be, it would be different than what we have by a lot because you can't show 35 seasons of The Simpsons or whatever it is. There's a lot of, content that wouldn't fit there. But I look at the companies that have figured out how to navigate China are generally have a massive growth opportunity. Is there risk to it? Absolutely. This is a country that could nationalize business. It could clamp down on foreign investment, but I don't think that's the level of risk people talk it up being because China doesn't want to close itself off to global capital. And if all of a sudden China came in and, and took Starbucks and gave it to Luckin Coffee, that would not be a good thing. And I will proudly say, I never believed in Luckin Coffee. And it's not because I saw fraud coming. It's because there's a lot of brand consciousness in China. And Luckin Coffee, the way it operated as largely a kiosk, largely automated, it didn't set itself up as a premium brand. It was sort of like if you said the coffee at Cumberland Farms is better than the coffee at Starbucks. That might be true. Or the coffee at 7-Eleven is better than Starbucks. Possible? I don't know. It could be. But nobody's going to think you're cool with your 7-Eleven cup. And that's, you have to understand the market. So again, I'm not scouring the world looking for like the next up and coming company. There's some I like, but in general, I want to see how American companies I understand scale to China. And I keep mentioning Starbucks, but like they didn't just take coffee and bring it to China. Like if I've been to the Starbucks in the Bahamas. There's like 12 of them on Nassau, or all around Nassau. And the menu is pretty similar. There's a couple of guava pastries, but other than that, it's about the same. If you look at the special offerings in China and the basic menu in China, there's just a lot of items that are local. There's still coffee. There's still a lot of the experiences, but there's jellies. There's other things that add into coffee. We don't tend to put a lot of solids in our coffee here, and that's something that they do. So look at companies in Disney. It didn't work, but Disney's attempt to make Mulan palatable to China hit some political walls there, but that was a film cleared to release, and not that many American films are cleared to release in China. Probably not the one they should have picked. Might have been better off with something a little less political, but that shows that in this day of maybe American box office waning, where a Chinese blockbuster can be bigger than an American blockbuster, that Disney will have the ability to go to that well every now and again.
Those are great points about the local differences, Dan, not only for coffee and teas, but also for kind of, what kind of media do you want to show to the population there? A kind of higher level, are there any big takeaways on how the Chinese consumer purchasing is different than what we're used to here in the United States?
So I hate to generalize a population. And you asked this question, I almost pushed back and said, I don't want to answer that because it seems like, but I think in general, brands really matter, but there's less brand loyalty. So right now, there's cachet in holding a Starbucks cup. That doesn't mean that, say, Nespresso couldn't come in. Now, that's not going to happen because Nestle and Starbucks are partners. But let's say there's another prestige brand in that space, or even, say, Panera Bread, if they marketed themselves as a prestige brand and rolled out in China. And the same could be true of Tesla, of other American brands that are operating there, where, yes, right now, there's absolutely some cultural cachet. The other thing is social media is very relevant. We have influencers here in the US. Younger kids are obviously influenced by their friends. In China, it's fairly common to use social media to decide to make a purchase. Like, hey, friends, I'm thinking about buying, let's think of the most American thing of all. I'm thinking about buying Levi's jeans. Are these still in fashion? And that's going to be an influence. Again, it's not 1,000% different than what we're doing here in the US, but it might be more tightly integrated.
Great points, Dan. Now, I've got to ask you about Disney because I know that's a company that's very close to your heart. Pre-COVID, so 2019, Shanghai Disney had a lot of people that visited that. How many estimated visitors went to Shanghai Disney in the year 2019?
Oh, this is a tough one because Shanghai Disney is a licensing deal essentially, so it's not reported. I'm going to say 9 million. Is that anywhere close?
11 million. So again, very, very close. I'm quite impressed by the team. Even late in the evening or early in the morning, you guys are right within the range. It was 11 million estimated visiting Shanghai Disney before COVID hit. Great points. Thanks for the thoughts about the Chinese consumer there, Dan. I'm going to kind of take that to the same region, but in a different direction too. You said something about influencers in China. I think that that's very interesting to me as well, because my international perspective was on Generation Z in China. There's an estimated 930 million internet connected mobile users in China. And of those, 450 million of those are between the ages of 12 and 36 years old. So we have a very internet connected, tech savvy, younger generation in China that's using the internet. And what are they using it for primarily? Well, they're talking to their friends, they're surfing the internet, but they're also watching videos. In fact, an estimated 2.5 hours per day per user of those 450 million Generation Z in China are watching streaming video on the internet. 2.5 hours a day today, an estimated 3.5 hours a day by the year 2025. And so a lot of that is produced by businesses, but a lot of it also is coming from user-generated content, similar to what we've gotten used to in the United States with YouTube. And an even bigger population is starting to watch live-streamed esports competitions. So over in China, a lot of it is digital. They've got competitions that are online, similar to our Super Bowl. This is getting an audience of 50 million people or more tuning in digitally to watch these large events. And of course, because most of them are watching from mobile devices and moving to urban populations and cities, the infrastructure developments of 5G make it easier and easier to watch and stream video without any latency problems at all. And so the company that's on my radar is a company called Bilibili. This is kind of China's play on live streams and video content that's being streamed over the internet. Bilibili has 200 million monthly active users. That's an estimated almost half, or 40% rather, of the 450 Gen Z. And it's really targeting this younger generation, internet connected and tech savvy. And they're interacting, if you can believe this, 5 billion times every day with one another. Bullet chats, text with one another, virtual gifting, anything that you can watch a video or play a game online. There's a treasure trove of data that's attracting the attention of advertisers and a lot of other companies as well. And so I think that when you apply machine learning to all of this data, you just get you unleash Pandora's box for advertisers. They just secured 3 years of rights to the League of Legends international esports competition, which is kind of like China's Super Bowl, really the global Super Bowl. It's an online video game. And this is one that's really kind of caught my eye. And I think that just the larger trend of the younger generation getting internet connected in China is something that I'm watching quite as well. So there you have it. This is our month of international perspectives here at 7 Investing. Just to recap a couple of them that we mentioned earlier, Max Chatsko was speaking about the gifts of Argentina with natural resources, energy, lithium, and agriculture. Steve talked about financial technology in Brazil and mentioned StoneCo, which the ticker on that is STNE, as one company that he had his eye on. Dana Abramovitz was talking about healthcare and how there's a lot more interest in healthcare around the world and the security and how do we control things like pandemics internationally. Matt Cochran was speaking about the growing middle class of India. He briefly mentioned HDFC Bank, which is HDB, the ticker on the New York Stock Exchange. He also mentioned Fairfax India Holdings, which is traded over the counter as FFXDF. Anirban Mahanti then spoke about kind of investing in a bunch of emerging economies, including India, Russia, and all across the world. He did mention Ozon, which is an e-commerce company in Russia. Ticker on that is OZON. And then Dan Klein mentioned about two American companies, Starbucks and Disney, who both have definitely got a consumer-facing presence in China. And I mentioned Bilibili as a play on the Chinese younger generation, and the ticker on that is BILI. I would like to thank all of our lead advisors for attending this month's team podcast for 7 Investing. We hope that you enjoyed our perspectives on international investing. We'll see you next month. And until then, thanks for tuning in. And we're here to empower you to invest in your future. We are 7 Investing.